Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about a player that for the last couple of years, and maybe even arguably throughout his entire career, has been one of the most polarizing players in the league, and that is Carmelo Anthony, who still finds himself without a team this offseason. And it's strange that a player that was as talented as Carmelo was, and still has a good amount of talent as well, hasn't found a team yet. This is a guy that has been considered at times maybe one of the best players in the league and almost led the Nuggets to the finals back in 2009. But people have always had their issues with Melo as well, whether it be his decision to force his way out of Denver to New York and cause the Knicks to give up a ton of assets in return when they could have just signed him that summer, though many people rightly choose to put a lot of the blame on the team for that, or his decision to sign a 5-year, $124 million deal in 2014 to stay with the Knicks, rather than seek out a better situation that was more conducive to winning. And then in his next two stops, Oklahoma City and Houston, he was criticized for his play not only on the court, but for also not fitting in and accepting a reduced and/or bench role that he was clearly much better suited for on those particular teams. And even though those are all fair points to varying degrees, and Melo's ISO-heavy scoring player style isn't as desired as it used to be, nor does it really lend itself super well to a player playing well as they age, it's still strange to see that not a single team across the NBA has taken a chance on him and signed him as a free agent so far this summer. As he recently said on First Take, how can he not make a 15-man roster in a 30-team league? Well, let's go ahead and explore why Carmelo Anthony still hasn't been signed. And we're going to begin with that comment that he made about there being 30 teams across the league, 15 roster spots. How can he not be in one of those roster spots? And on paper that makes sense, but when you actually break it down, it's really not that much of an argument at all. So basically what Melo is saying is if there are 30 teams of 15 player rosters, then there are 450 available spots in the league, and he is certainly one of the best 450 basketball players in the world, thus meaning that he should be on an NBA roster, which numbers-wise is true. If there was just a ranking of the best 450 basketball players across the entire world, and that alone allowed you to be on an NBA roster, then Carmelo certainly would be, because even as much as we talk about the regression of his skill set and his talent with his age, he hasn't fallen out of the top 450 basketball players in the entire world. However, that's not how the NBA works at all, and for Carmelo and players like him, there are actually a lot less roster spots available in reality. Because NBA teams typically save their 10th through 15th spots on their roster for either good veterans that are locker room presences that help out the young guys, or just young developmental players that are maybe on two-way contracts or go back and forth from the G League, and Carmelo is not in either of those categories as a player, at least hasn't proven to be one in terms of the good veteran locker room presence to this point in his career. Now, that's not to say that he can't be a good locker room presence, it's just that he hasn't shown it to this point in his career. And if you're being honest, if you're signing Carmelo Anthony, it's not so that he can sit on the bench and clap, it's so that he can play. So if you sign him for a 10th through 15th spot on your roster and he doesn't play, more than likely he's going to make a comment about it. It's going to create a huge distraction. The media is going to make a big deal out of it. And at that point, it's just not worth it. So he's really not eligible for the last 5 spots on the roster. So realistically, those 15 roster spots that he was talking about are probably cut down to about 8 per team, because if you're signing Carmelo Anthony, he's going to play, he's going to want to be in the rotation, so he can't really be a bottom 7 guy on the team. So if you do that and you take the 30 teams across the NBA and multiply that by the 8 roster spots that are now available for Carmelo, that actually brings the total roster spots number down to 240. So now when you look at it, ask yourself, is Carmelo a top 240 basketball player in the entire world? And yeah, he probably is. He hasn't fallen off that much, but you can't just consider, oh, he's a top 240 guy at this point, because there is, like I said, the Melo distraction aspect of all of this. So if a team is thinking about bringing in Carmelo because they think that he is worthy of being in an NBA rotation, they think that he is a top 240 player in the entire league, maybe they start to look at it and say, okay, well, there's this other guy over here that's like top 270, but maybe is a little bit younger and doesn't bring the distractions with him that Melo does, and then they start going with those guys that are outside of the top 240 rather than Melo. And even then, you can't realistically say that every single team in the entire league has a situation that would be benefited by signing Carmelo Anthony, so there really aren't 30 teams with 8 roster spots available to sign Melo. Because many teams have younger players that they want to prioritize them taking shots, they don't want Melo to take those away from them and take away from their development, or they're just not really interested in being a high seed or making the playoffs this upcoming season, so it just doesn't really make sense for those teams to sign Carmelo because it doesn't help them achieve their goals. So let's just say that for the sake of argument that half the league could use Melo on their team, which in my opinion is certainly an overestimate, but let's just say that that's the case anyway. If we're considering 15 teams times the 8 roster spots that I talked about earlier, that's 120 total NBA roster spots that Melo could be well suited for, and as I said, that's being pretty generous. And even if you think that that's a place that Carmelo Anthony belongs, you think he's a top 120 player in the league, which I'll get to in a second, it's not just about talent, as we've learned with a lot of teams across NBA history. There are players that aren't in the league right now that are immensely talented, and that's not the issue. It's their ability to fit in and to play a role. And twice now, and maybe you can even argue 3 times, Carmelo has been given the opportunity to fit into a new role, and he hasn't been able to do it. He's never been successful on a team in which he was not the guy and the leading scorer, and also contributed to winning in a very positive way. We just haven't seen it, which continues to bring down his value. It isn't just about his talent, it's about his fit. And his ability to fit in, and to a certain extent his talent, is only going to decrease from here on out as well. He's now 35 years old, and it's not going to get any better. So if he couldn't fit in on a team a year ago in Houston or 2 years ago in Oklahoma City, why are teams going to expect him to be able to now just because he's so desperate to get back in the league? I think that he probably could change if a team decided to bring him in. He could probably realize that the game almost got taken away from him. He gets a second chance. That can be a big motivation and a big motivating factor for him to say, hey, I need to get it together. I need to fit in, or I'm not going to be in the NBA anymore. But I think maybe that opportunity was in Houston, and that has already passed him by, and teams have seen now twice or 3 times maybe that it's just not going to work, and he lost his chance essentially. So with that said, does anybody really think that Carmelo Anthony at this point in his career, at 35 years old, is still a top 120 NBA player? And even if you do, even if you think that that's the case, then you also have to consider, like I said earlier, the distraction aspect of all this and the baggage that Melo brings with him, which in my opinion is the biggest thing holding him back from being signed. Like if you just copied everything about Carmelo Anthony from an on-court perspective, like his game, his height, his age, everything, and put him on a different player that's willing to ride the bench, be a good teammate, play well when called upon, and not create any distractions, I have zero doubt that that guy would end up making an NBA roster and would be on a team right now. And that's what differentiates Carmelo from other players in the past that we've seen, like for example, Vince Carter. Vince was willing to be a good teammate in a couple of different spots like Memphis and Sacramento and Atlanta and provide value to the team even when he wasn't playing, and then once they called upon him to play, he was good for them as well. Vince Carter learned how to be a good locker room presence, to be a good veteran guy on those couple of teams that he was on, and that's why he was able to continue to find a team year after year, although obviously he hasn't found a new team yet this summer, and that's the major difference between him and Melo at this point. And unfortunately for Melo, a lot of the reasons why he's kind of being held back from signing with a new team this offseason are 100% his fault. His inability to adapt to a new situation in Houston or in Oklahoma City are definitely big reasons why he hasn't signed with a new team. Now, I will give him a little bit of a pass on the distraction and the media aspect of that, because the media certainly plays that up because he is Carmelo, and so that isn't 100% his fault, but the other stuff is definitely on him. If things had gone better in Oklahoma City or in Houston, he probably would have signed with a new team by now, but unfortunately that hasn't happened, and so now he's just continually working out in Lifetime Fitness gyms like he does every summer, waiting on a call to be signed to a new team. And maybe this is just the way that his career was meant to go. Maybe his game and personality were never suited to a long stay in the NBA well into his late 30s. Not every great player gets the chance to decide when to walk away from the game on their own terms, and sometimes the game just simply moves on without them, and that might be what's happening to Carmelo Anthony. His unwillingness to adapt his game and play style, and just an overall stubbornness about his place in the league hierarchy at this point in his career, could very well result in the end of his NBA career this summer. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.